Chapter 1. Two Bosses. The Badlands stank of squig droppings, sweat, and blood, a stench that rolled off the cracked earth like smoke from a fire. Crows circled lazily above the jagged peaks of Kraggfang Hold, their wings slicing through the heat haze, watching with greedy eyes for the next fresh corpse. Below them, nestled between black cliffs and surrounded by broken siege towers and splintered ramshackle palisades, the ruined dwarf fortress squatted like a half-crushed skull, its once proud stone now painted in dried gore and smeared with crude glyphs scrawled in pig's blood. And around it, war raged. Again, the Iron Fangs. On the western rise, the Iron Fangs' camp was a mass of stinking tents made from stitched-together hides, most still wearing the faces of their previous owners. The banners flapped in the wind, iron spikes jammed through mangled skulls, and bone-chained symbols of Gork, or possibly Mork, daubed in dried dung. The warband moved like a herd of angry beasts, constantly fighting, wrestling, biting. Orc boys squabbled over scraps of meat while squig herders chased their bouncing, fang-filled beasts through the mud. One particularly large squig, purple and bulging with tumors, chomped a goblin in half and was rewarded with a cheer and a hail of rotten meat. At the heart of it all stood a monster of an orc, Ghazruk the Skullkrakka. 8 feet tall, slab-muscled and adorned in crudely riveted black iron armor patched with the teeth of trolls and the scalps of elves, Ghazruk loomed like a walking mountain of rage. His helm, shaped like a snarling maw, was fused to his skull by a smithy accident, or so the story said. He claimed it let him see the world angrier. His axe, Mork's Grin, was little more than a rusted slab of metal with chainsaw teeth welded to it, buzzing hungrily with every flex of his massive form. "Where's that zoggin gobbo?" Ghazruk bellowed, his voice like gravel grinding in a cave-in. "I want me the late's insult from that pointy-faced git Mogduff." A sniveling goblin messenger was shoved forward by a larger orc, already bleeding from one ear. The runt trembled, clutching a scrap of yellowing parchment. "A boss," he says. "He says you's got a face like a squig's arse and breath like a troll's fart," the goblin squeaked. There was silence for a heartbeat. Then Ghazruk roared with laughter, a sound like an avalanche made of steel and hate. "That actually not bad. Put it on me, totem pole." Then he stomped forward and without warning grabbed the goblin by the ankles and slammed him into a boulder hard enough to leave a red smear and a few twitching limbs. "Too slow delivering it, though. Next time be faster." The Red Tooth boys. Across the valley, the Red Tooth camp was more organized, barely. Their siege towers stood mostly upright, and their goblins were fewer in number, thanks to stricter discipline or hungrier orcs. Crimson flags fluttered from spiked poles, each bearing the jagged-toothed maw that marked the Red Tooth boys, painted in a bright, sticky red that was probably someone's blood. The boys themselves were leaner, meaner, and crueler. Where the Iron Fangs were blunt instruments, the Red Tooths were shivs in the dark. Their armor was scavenged, dwarf mail mixed with jagged spikes and shark teeth. Cruelty was a virtue here. Pain a language they all spoke. Seated on a throne of scavenged bones, gnawed clean by night goblins and then lacquered with blood, sat Mogduff One-Tusk, warboss and sadist extraordinaire. His jaw, broken years ago in a squig pit fight, jutted to one side, and his single tusk had been replaced with a gold spike dipped in poison. His armor was painted with crushed beetles and the blood of elves, each handprint on his pauldrons representing a tribe he'd crushed. He didn't yell like Ghazruk. Mogduff whispered, and when he did, boys leaned in, because if you didn't listen, you got gutted, slowly. "Bring me the new message," he rasped, licking dried blood from his teeth. Another goblin scurried up. This one was missing 2 fingers and had a stitched-up eye. He held the message like it was poison. Boss Ghazruk says, Tell that scabby mushroom sucker that I'm gonna pull his spine out through his navel and use it as a toothbrush." "Ah, sir." Mogduff nodded slowly. "Nice. Poetic, that one." Then, with surprising speed, he drew a jagged dagger and buried it in the goblin's skull. The runt twitched, gargled, and dropped. "Can't let da runt think he's too important. Makes da others cheeky." Behind him, the red-toothed noobs chuckled darkly. Kraggfang Hold the prize. Between them stood Kraggfang Hold, its gates long shattered by previous orcish sieges, its halls filled with echoes and old bones. Neither warband dared to fully occupy it, not while the other still lived. They fought around it, over it, even under it. One warband would seize the gatehouse, only to be routed 2 nights later by a midnight assault. The dwarf glyphs had long been defaced, the stonework cracked by siege engines crafted from stolen wagon wheels and reinforced with squig-hide ropes. Spackers dug tunnels under the holes, trying to collapse sections on enemy heads. More than once a red-tooth pit had accidentally broken into an Iron Fang tunnel, and the resulting underground brawls had become so legendary that nearby goblin tribes sold tickets. Yet for all the hatred, there was something else. When Ghazruk roared in challenge, Mogduff always answered. When Mogduff sent a raiding party, Ghazruk countered with double. They knew each other's tricks. Each had stopped the other from being killed a dozen times, not out of mercy, but because they wanted to be the one to finish the job. They needed each other. Enemies, rivals, brothers in violence. And in the gathering dusk, as storm clouds rolled over the jagged peaks, a new WAAAGH began to brew, not from unity, not from peace, but from this endless clash of green flesh, black iron, and bottomless spite. In the shadows beyond the camps, a single pair of beady goblin eyes watched it all. Sniknibble grinned. Chapter 2. Dagobbo's Cunning Plan. Deep in the festering crevice between the Iron Fangs and Red-Tooth camps, beneath a rotting pile of fungus-riddled squig carcasses and a collapsed wagon of severed dwarf heads, lay a half-collapsed burrow known only as Da Drippenhole. No one important ever went there, which is exactly why Sniknibble liked it. The goblin was small, even for his kind, barely 3 feet of mottled green sinew wrapped in a tangle of patchy robes and bones. His eyes were oversized and constantly twitching, never looking in quite the same direction. Bits of fetishes and dried animal guts dangled from his staff, clattering as he moved. His skin was dotted with war paint made from squig bile and crushed bugs, which he insisted gave him visions. The other goblins said he was mad. He didn't mind, he agreed. Well, WAAAGH in the mind. Sniknibble sat hunched over a chalk circle carved into the dirt with a femur, filled with twitching beetles and glowing mushrooms. He stared into it as if it might answer him. "Right," he whispered, poking at a twitching grub with a broken nail. "The big lads. They's too dumb to see the truth. Too busy punching each you've ever's teeth out." He twitched. Too busy hitting to realize they could be hitting someone else with twice the fists. Outside the burrow, a scream echoed through the hills. A red-tooth raiding party had found an Iron Fangs foraging group. Bones cracked. Something exploded. Sniknibble grinned. "See? That's the thing. Day's perfect for each you vat. A match made in Mork's stinking pit." He shuffled across the cave, where a crude map of Kraggfang Hold had been daubed in squig blood on the wall. Tiny bone figures, one painted black for the Iron Fangs, one red for the Red-Tooth boys, sat on either side of the ruined keep. Dozens of smaller bones goblins lay squashed in the middle. "Look at this mess. We's all getting stomped 'cause da bosses is too busy trying to outroar each other." He picked up the red bone and tapped it against the black one. "Yous two need a nice little nudge, a bit of gobbo magic." He turned and walked over to a row of shrunken heads nailed to the wall, each with a different expression. One was laughing, one was weeping, one was just screaming. "He's got a plan," Sniknibble said to them. "A cunning plan." One of the heads twitched. Sniknibble slapped it. "Don't interrupt me, Zargle. You's dead. Stay dat way. Da big lads never see it comin'." What made Sniknibble different wasn't just his magic, though he could boil a goblin's brain with a look if he really concentrated. It was the way he thought. He'd lived long enough to learn the truth. Big orcs didn't think goblins could think. That made them blind. And blind bosses made easy targets for influence. He had seen it before, orcs following visions, eating weird mushrooms, obeying signs from the gods. Most of it was dung. But if you could pretend a message came from Mork or Gork, well, even a war boss would listen. He could already see it, Ghazruk and Mogduff, standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder, bashing in the heads of men and dwarfs and ogres alike. Thousands of boys, roaring the same chant, a WAAAGH, so big it made the mountains weep, blood. And he, Sniknibble, would be right at the center of it, not in front, too dangerous, but behind the curtain, whispering, guiding, directing. The puppet master. And when it was done, he'd be more than a shaman. He'd be Prophet Sniknibble de Greentongue, advisor to the greatest WAAAGH the Badlands had ever seen. Goblin politics, lethal and petty. Still, he had to be careful. Other goblins already watched him with suspicion. His little gang of squint-eyed loyalists, Runk, Scabbo, and Blind, Maggot had barely survived last week's poisoning attempt. Maggot had lost most of his face. Sniknibble hadn't even noticed. "Gotta move careful," he muttered, mixing a paste of spider bile and fermented bat urine in a cracked skull bowl. "Can't just tell da bosses what to do. Gotta trick 'em. Gotta whisper the right lies in the right ears." He dipped a bone quill into the paste and began scrawling a love message from Ghazruk to Mogduff in orcish runes deliberately made crude and hard to trace. It read, "Oi, I seen you bash that ogre last week. Made me wag. Real ord. Maybe we's not so different, you and me. Maybe we's could be mates. For bashin' stuff, innit? Signed, definitely not a gobbo. Ghazruk the Respectful." He giggled as he finished, drooling a bit. Next would be the same in reverse, one from Mogduff to Ghazruk, praising his axe work, his fighting smell, and his ability to scream louder than a wyvern in heat. He'd seed the notes with goblin messengers too dumb to question the job, or too terrified. Most wouldn't survive long after delivery, but that was fine. Messages only needed to live long enough to land. The survivors would get extra mushroom rations and maybe a place in Sniknibble's cave. Not that they'd last long there, either. Laying the foundations. Once the rumors were planted, he'd escalate. He'd tell both bosses the other had started thinking about peace, or alliance, or maybe even respect. Nothing insulted an orc faster than suggesting he fancied another boss's tactics. But also, nothing intrigued them more. Sniknibble understood it. Orcs were violence incarnate, but they were drawn to strength. They'd never admit admiration, but they felt it. And admiration twisted into hate, and hate twisted into obsession, and, well, obsession was just loyalty with spikes on it. He stepped back from the wall, admiring his little war map. "This'll work," he muttered. "Mork's sweaty backside, this is gonna work." And from deeper in the shadows of the cave, something giggled. Or maybe it was just the mushrooms. Chapter 3. Rumors and Lies. The sun never truly shone in the Badlands. It bled light, raw, red, and angry, spilling over the broken rocks like the aftermath of some ancient slaughter. Dust clouds rose with every stomp of iron-shod boots, and the air was thick with the stink of unwashed orc flesh, fungus rot, and the ever-present tang of dried blood. But beneath the smell of steel and bile, something else began to take root. Suspicion. The worst kind. The kind that crept behind the eyes, clutched the brain, and whispered in the dark corners of rage-soaked minds. And it started, as so many bad things do, with a goblin and a lie. Ghazruk boss I ear to fing. In the Iron Fang's camp, Ghazruk the Skullkrakka sat atop a crude throne made from mashed-together siege debris and stitched-together hides of defeated champions. A fresh dwarf skull dangled from his belt, leaking brain fluid onto his greaves. 2 orcs beat each other bloody in the mud before him, arguing over who had more kills in yesterday's squig hunt. Neither noticed the goblin until it was too late. "Boss Ghazruk, boss," squeaked Snagga, one of Sniknibble's many twitchy-armed informants. He skidded in the mud, already bleeding from his ear. A bad omen. Ghazruk turned slowly, his breath steaming like furnace smoke through the slits in his welded-on helm. "If dis ain't important," he growled, rising to his full monstrous height, "I'm gonna turn your legs into soup." Snagga swallowed his own spit and winced. "It's Mogduff, boss. Said something." The brawling orcs paused. Nearby red-fanged nobs turned their heads. Ghazruk's eye twitched. He stepped forward, each boot sinking into the mud with a wet schlorp. What did he? Snagga's knees knocked. He was talking to his nobsats. Didn't think no one was listening. "But we was," said he. "I said you was a proper basha, that yez got the fury of Gork himself in your swing, and that he had dreams about your axe, sparkly dreams, boss." Ghazruk's lip curled, revealing yellowed tusks and several extra teeth embedded in his gums like trophies. "He dreamed about me axe," Ghazruk said slowly, like tasting something foul. Snagga nodded fast. "Yeah, boss. Said maybe you's worthy of a proper fight, not just bashin', like an equal, a mate, for smashin' stuff." The word mate hung in the air like a bloated fly. Then came the silence. Then came the explosion. Ghazruk howled like a wyvern in heat, grabbed a nearby orc by the leg, and used him as a club to smash through his own tent, roaring nonsense curses at the sky. "Da punt sneak in. One-tusked dung-suckin' stunty licker thinks I'm his friend." Bits of armor and gore rained down. Snagga was gone. He knew better than to wait for thanks. As Ghazruk tore through his own camp like a green hurricane, another goblin messenger was limping into the red-tooth camp, cradling a bloodied scroll and missing half his nose. "Mogduff, boss, got news?" In the heart of the red-tooth boys' encampment, Mogduff One-Tusk lounged beneath a canopy made from stitched-together elf cloaks and night goblin hides. He was sharpening his golden tusk with a splintered dwarf axe and humming a low, tuneless growl. His face, even at rest, looked like it wanted to stab someone. "Speak, or bleed," he hissed, not bothering to look up. "Message, boss, from me cousin in da Iron Fangs. Heard Ghazruk talkin' in private." The goblin stammered. His name was Skidwart, and he already had a limp from a previous failure. "Talk about what?" He said you was smarter than a stunty." Silence. Mogduff's yellow eyes narrowed. "Smarter than a stunty?" Yeah, boss, and that you's got that kind of cunning that makes even Gork jealous. He even said, maybe if you was on his side, they could smash da humies and dwarfs together." Mogduff's breathing slowed. Ghazruk, that brute, that noisy slab of muscle and brain mush, he respected him, or was this a trap? Or worse, was Ghazruk trying to manipulate him? He stood, towering over the goblin like a looming storm cloud. "Dat ain't right. Dat ain't right at all. He hates me guts, wants me teeth, calls me a squig kisser." Mogduff stalked toward his bone map, staring at the shifting territories around Kraggfang Hold. "But if he's getting clever, If he's trying to pull a trick, I gotta strike first, before he tries to snuggle up and stab me in the night. He spat on the map. Prepared to grots. We's gotta do some listening. I want to know where he sleeps, when he farts, and what direction he wipes. Whispers in the night. Across both camps the goblins scurried. Snagga, Skidwart, Runk, Blind Maggot, Sniknibble's network of twitchy-eyed informants moved like lice on a troll's back, whispering in the dark, delivering poisoned rumors and carefully twisted overheards. They planted seeds in the minds of nobs, grunts, and lieutenants. Did ye hear Ghazruk was practicing a speech to Mogduff? Mogduff got a secret grot what makes paintings of Ghazruk bashing things. Heard Ghazruk was asking if Mogduff ever wanted to combine banners. Even the dumbest orcs felt it, something unnatural was brewing. They started watching their own boss with side eyes and hunched shoulders, unsure if this was all part of some massive con, or if they'd missed some kind of weird bosketship ritual. And through it all, Sniknibble watched from the shadows, licking his mossy teeth. The plan was working. Soon they'd be so tangled in rumors they wouldn't know truth from insult. Their rage would curdle into obsession. Not just hate, but complicated hate. The best kind. The kind you could build a WAAAGH on. Chapter 4. The Challenge. The sun bled through a sky the color of an infected wound. Vultures wheeled lazily over the broken cliffs of Kraggfang Hold, the air thick with the heat of tension and sweat-soaked metal. Across the barren field separating the two war camps, the drums of challenge were beating, loud, guttural, and impossibly off-rhythm. Ghazruk the Skullkrakka stood atop a jagged rock outcrop, holding a massive rusted horn carved from an ogre femur. His armor was freshly bloodied, more a statement than a stain, and his spiked helm steamed in the morning heat. "Mogduff," he bellowed across the wastes, voice booming like a wyvern's death cry. "You's got one chance, ya slimy tusk-cast nobler. Come out and face me in da proper way, or I'll use your legs as a belt." Behind him, 100 Iron Fangs chanted his name, banging shields and skulls together in a thunderous cacophony. Squigs roared in their pens, drums pounded like warhammers, smashing ribs. And on the far side of the field, under a ragged red banner, Mogduff One-Tusk squinted from his bone-carved throne, jaw twitching. "Is it drunk?" he muttered, eyes narrowing. One of his nobs, a particularly lumpy brute named Dragaskar, leaned forward. "Nah, boss. This looks real. But it stinks of a trap, like gobbo stew with too much mushroom and not enough poison." But he stood anyway, gripping the hilt of his curved barbed cleava. "Still, if he wants a duel, I ain't gonna let that dung heap call me a coward in front of me own lads." He spat a tooth into the dirt. "Tell him I'll meet him at Bonecrack Ridge, noon. Dat's neutral ground." The duel grounds. Bonecrack Ridge was a death trap. Narrow, unstable, half collapsed from decades of tunneling and bombardment. Perfect for a neutral. Duel between two maniacs with trust issues and too much muscle. The two warbands gathered like flocks of angry crows. The ridge itself groaned under the weight of so many iron-clad brutes and squig handlers. Squads of goblins swarmed like lice, setting up a fighting pit lined with rusted spikes, barbed chains, and torches soaked in troll fat. The duel would begin at noon, and by Mork's blackened arse, it would be memorable. Sniknibble, watching from the shadows with a squig on a leash and a scroll of fake prophecy in his robes, rubbed his palms together. "Oh, Diz is going to be lovely." Da ribble of de bosses. Ghazruk arrived first, carried on the shoulders of 4 ogre bone-armored nobs, each grunting under his bulk. His axe, Mork's grin, buzzed with barely contained violence, the whirring chain blades grinding bone from a recent test swing. He dismounted by headbutting one of his carriers unconscious, landing in a spray of blood and cheers. Moments later, Mogduff strode in from the other end of the ridge on foot, dragging his kliava across the stones, leaving a trail of sparks. He wore a chainmail cloak and a helm shaped like a leering squig skull. Their eyes met. The crowd silenced. Then Ghazruk sneered. "Look at yous, showing up all fancy-like. What, no Ponzi wine gobos to wipe your nose?" Mogduff hissed. "I figured I'd need both hands free for ripping your spine out through your ear." Ghazruk grinned wide, revealing a tooth that wasn't his. "Let's WAAAGH ya one-tusked heap o' squig snot." The duel, such as it was. They charged. And for 5 glorious seconds it was a duel. Metal slammed against metal. Sparks showered across the ridge. Axes met cleava. Boots cracked rocks, and the warbands howled as their bosses collided like gods of violence. Then the first scaffold collapsed. Ghazruk had swung wide, clipped a nearby support beam holding up a squid-watching platform. The structure groaned and toppled, sending 6 goblins screaming into a pile of sharpened sticks. One was impaled through both eyes and continued to twitch enthusiastically. Mogduff stepped aside, narrowly avoiding a tumbling squig cage that burst open to unleash a 2-headed, foam-mouthed beast. The squig bit an iron fangs in half. "Oi, this ain't regulation," Mogduff growled, ducking as Ghazruk's axe buried itself in a boulder. "Not my fault, ye stupid squigs can't build a prop arena." Ghazruk roared back, grabbing a dazed knob and hurling him like a projectile at Mogduff. Mogduff sidestepped, and the knob hit the ridge wall with a wet crunch. The impact sent a tremor through the cliff. The stone groaned ominously. A landslide began. Chaos, cracks, and cackling. As boulders tumbled and squigs screamed, the duel disintegrated into sheer farce. Ghazruk and Mogduff leapt and dodged, hurling insults and occasionally rocks. Goblins screamed as the ridge began to collapse, entire sections caving in. One red-toothed banner-bearer was swallowed whole by a crevice mid-chant. Sniknibble, cackling wildly, rode the squig down the hill like a grotesque sled, his robes flapping like a banner. Dust and blood filled the air. When the tremors stopped and the debris settled, Ghazruk and Mogduff found themselves sitting side by side in the dirt, covered in rubble and squig drool, gasping for breath. They turned to look at each other. Ghazruk was missing a boot. Mogduff's helmet had been split in half. For a moment, silence. Then, unexpectedly, Mogduff snorted. Ghazruk chuckled. They tried to suppress it. Failed. They laughed like mad things, not out of joy, but out of pure, exhausted disbelief. 2 monsters, bloodied and battered, laughing in the wreckage of their own egos. Then Ghazruk growled, "Dis don't mean I like ye." Mogduff wiped blood from his mouth. "Good. I'd kill myself if it did." They stood, without helping each other, and returned to their warbands. Neither acknowledged the laughter. But neither forgot it, either. And behind a boulder, giggling like a lunatic and biting on his own knuckles, Sniknibble knew the plan was working. Chapter 5. Sniknibble's Trials. There was a certain smell to goblin betrayal. It wasn't just the normal stench of sweat, squig piss, and unwashed groin rags. No, this one was distinct, a sharp, musky tang, like rotting mushrooms left to ferment in a troll's colon. Sniknibble knew that smell well, because now it was everywhere. Someone's been sniffing the fungus. Deep in the filth-caked warrens beneath the ravaged flanks of Kraggfang Hold, Sniknibble sat cross-legged in his sanctum. A half-collapsed chamber lit by glowing fungi and buzzing with the frantic hum of squigflies. Bone charms rattled from the ceiling. A freshly peeled rat, still twitching, floated in a pot of bubbling spider-grease soup. Around him the walls whispered, not literally, but close. Sniknibble chewed on a wad of dream fungus and grunted. His mind felt stretched, tense, like squig hide pulled too tight. His web of lies was fraying, and he knew it. The whispers were getting louder. The bosses were thinking. Worse, they were asking questions. The hobgoblin in the dark. It started with a visit from Kraggfang the Crooked, a lean, scar-faced hobgoblin mercenary with a lazy eye and a very straight dagger. Kraggfang didn't knock. Hobgoblins didn't do polite. He slithered into the chamber like smoke through a crack, accompanied by 2 brutish Knoblar bodyguards and the stench of boiled troll leather. "Well, well, Prophet Sniknibble," Kraggfang sneered, his voice a snake-oil drawl. "I heard you been playing to big lads like bone flutes." Sniknibble didn't flinch, just twitched. "I play nothing. I guide. I inspire." "Oh, please," Kraggfang said, tossing a blood-stained scrap of parchment onto the floor. It was one of Sniknibble's forged love notes between the bosses, this one half-burnt and covered in sticky squig bile. "Found dat in a latrine. Some dumb git used it for bog roll. Lucky for me, I read." Sniknibble blinked. "You read?" Kraggfang's eyes narrowed. "Wrong answer." He stepped closer, dagger glinting with a yellow sheen. "Now, here's de thing. You either cut me in on what you's planning, or I spill this whole story to both warbosses. I'll even sing it in a poem, nice and loud, with rhymes and drums." Sniknibble didn't answer. He just snapped his fingers. The floor beneath Kraggfang erupted in green flame as a hidden squig, shaved, oiled, and covered in spikes, leapt from the shadows and sank its teeth into the hobgoblin's thigh. Kraggfang screamed, trying to fight it off, but the beast was fast and hungry. The Neoblas ran, smart ones those. Sniknibble watched as the squig tore off Kraggfang's leg, chewing noisily. The hobgoblin gurgled on his own blood, trying to crawl away. "I don't share credit," Sniknibble whispered, eyes gleaming. Then he stepped on Kraggfang's neck, pressing down until the meat crunched. He wiped his foot on the hobgoblin's coat. Neck, the gobbo's losing grip. But Kraggfang was just the first. By week's end, 4 goblin rivals had tried to sniff out what Sniknibble was really doing. Skugward the Stabber had bribed a squig herder for information. Weebs the Snitch was caught whispering in the Red Tooth camp. One of them even tried to lace Sniknibble's sleep bag with spore mines. It was getting messy. Sniknibble dealt with them all, quietly, bloodily. Poisoned mushrooms, rigged dice games, a mislabeled, glow-in-dark potion that turned Wibbs's skin inside out. But the cost was growing. He had fewer spies now, and the survivors were twitchy. He'd begun casting illusions just to keep the bosses distracted, fake signs from Mork painted in feces, mysterious visions delivered by goblins stuffed into glow squigs, even a staged ghost made from a shaved snotling, wrapped in bandages and hung on wires. But even the big lads were starting to twitch. "Voss, why do you say that?" Ghazruk had cornered one of his nobs after a feast, dragging him into a squig pan. "You's heard Mogduff say I fights like gawk," he growled. The nob gulped. "Yeah, boss, but maybe it was sarcasm?" Ghazruk narrowed his eyes and fed him to the squigs anyway. Across the battlefield, Mogduff was just as unsettled. He stared at the latest message, scratched on the back of a dwarf breastplate, written in crude Orcish. "Let's kill some stunties together, just like old times." Old times? What old times? Mogduff crushed the breastplate in one hand and snarled at the stars. "Dat brute's planning something, I know it." But in both of their skull-thick minds, a seed had been planted. Why would he say dat if he didn't mean it? Unless they did respect each other. Unless they'd been wrong. They hated the thought, but couldn't stop thinking it. It's working. It's all fallen apart. Back in his hole, Sniknibble crouched over his map of Kraggfang Hold. Half the bones were missing. The ones that remained were painted in soot and dried blood. His fingers shook. The edges of his mind were fraying. The magic was biting deeper now. Every illusion burned more than the last. He'd started talking to himself, and to the shrunken heads, and sometimes to things that weren't there. Still, he grinned, because the bosses hadn't killed each other. Not yet. And not only that, rumors had begun to swirl. Not of betrayal, but of possibility. A new camp had sprung up near the ruins. Orcs from both warbands were gathering between the lines. They weren't fighting, just waiting, smelling the shift in the wind. The WAAAGH was coming. He could feel it. Just hold together a bit longer, Sniknibble muttered to himself, gnawing on a bone. Keep the lies thick, delusions shiny, and da blood flowing. Just a bit more, and we'll all be gods. Chapter 6. Dahumi Rain. The dawn came gray and sullen over Kraggfang Hold, seeping through the broken clouds like thin soup through a cracked bowl. No birds sang. They knew better. This wasn't a place for nature's gentle songs, only war cries, death rattles, and the occasional squig fart. A wind kicked up, and with it came something new, something wrong. It smelled like horse sweat, like iron polish, like discipline. It smelled like humies. Stunties don't ride osses. The Gobbo camp on the southern edge of the Ironfang's line was barely more than a pile of moldy tents and half-dead squigs tied together by fungal rope. Snotlings scuttled in the muck, chewing on their own toes, and the air was thick with the noise of squabbling, farting, and occasional screaming. Typical. That's why the humans struck here first. The border princes weren't known for finesse, but this particular patrol, 20 or so hardened mercenary soldiers armed in patchwork plate and mounted on snorting destrias, had one thing going for them: surprise. The first bolt took a goblin right through the neck, pinning him to a fungal totem. He didn't even have time to squeal. The second volley tore into the squig pens. Then the firebombs came. Within seconds, the camp was screaming. Fire, steel, and screaming gobbos. Goblins exploded in every direction, some on fire, some just opportunistically fleeing. Snotlings were trampled underfoot or launched into the air by frenzied squigs. One squig, its tongue aflame, rampaged in a blind circle, devouring 3 gobbos and a human horse before collapsing in a heap of melted flesh. The humans advanced, blades gleaming, cutting down greenskins by the dozen. Their captain, a grim-faced mercenary named Ernovek, barked orders as he cut a goblin clean in half. Drive them back. No survivors. We'll raise the camp, get the greenskins in disarray. He was halfway through a swing when a squig hurled a burning goblin at him like a catapult shot, knocking him from the saddle. His scream was muffled by the sound of his own helmet filling with fire. Enter Sniknibble, prophet of panic. From a nearby ridge, Sniknibble watched the slaughter through a cracked spyglass, cackling and chewing on a charred rat leg. "Humies, raid my camp," he hissed. "Ooh, dis is perfect." He didn't see an attack. He saw an opportunity. He hurled himself down the hill on a squig sled, skidding into the Ironfang's line covered in soot and goblin blood. "Boss!" he shrieked as he burst into Ghazruk's tent, knocking over 2 nobs and a half-assembled squig launcher. "Da hummus is here. Dey's attackin'. Not just a runt camp, all of us. Dere's hundreds." Ghazruk turned, mouth full of squig jerky, and blinked. "What?" "They got firebombs, crossbows, pointy hats. They's burnin' our squigs and laughin' while doin' it," said, "Your breath stinks." The axe was in Ghazruk's hand before Sniknibble finished speaking. His eye twitched. "Nah, Bez, get your boots on. We's gonna split some skulls." Meanwhile, in Redtooth territory, Sniknibble didn't stop. He sprinted, panting, through a shortcut tunnel filled with spores and screaming mushrooms until he burst into the Redtooth camp, heaving and foaming at the mouth for dramatic effect. Mogduff was mid-thrashing a goblin with his own leg bone. "What is it now?" he snarled, spattering the dirt with gore. "The homies is here, boss, right now. Burnin' camps, whippin' squigs, said you fight like a pioneer. Hundreds of 'em." Mogduff froze. He looked up. Then he snorted. "Nobles, grab your choppas. Looks like the homies wanna die loud. De battle O2 WAAGH, sorta." The field to the south of Kraggfang was chaos made flesh. Ironfang's boys charged in from the west, their armor clanking and war horns blaring like squigs in heat. Redtooth boys stormed in from the east, snarling and frothing, teeth bared, blades swinging. And in the middle, the humies, screaming. They didn't stand a chance. The orcs didn't plan it, didn't coordinate, but their bloodlust synced like instinct. Ironfang slammed into the left flank. Redtooth boys swept the right. The human line broke in seconds. One poor soldier tried to flee. Ghazruk caught him mid-sprint, lifting him into the air by his spine and tearing him in half like an old bread roll. Another tried to surrender. Mogduff shoved a squig grenade down his throat and kicked him into a horse. Lemps flew. Heads bounced. One human knight had his own helmet crushed around his face like a tin can by two separate hammers from opposing orcs. Then the orcs started punching each other over the kill. Squigs rampaged unchecked, devouring both man and goblin. A snotling artillery piece misfired and exploded, turning 4 gobbos into a green mist. And in the center of it all, Ghazruk and Mogduff crashed into the same cluster of knights from opposite ends, cleaving through plate and flesh alike. Back to back they fought, neither acknowledging the other but swinging in perfect rhythm. One knight raised a sword. Ghazruk's axe removed his arms. Another turned to run. Mogduff's clava split his skull to the collarbone. They grunted. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The battle ended in fire, screams, and a pile of corpses 6 feet high. Aftermath and unspoken things. The few surviving humans fled south, screaming into the wastes. The field was slick with blood. Burnt banners flapped in the breeze. Squigs snored as they chewed on steel-plated limbs. Ghazruk sat on a ruined wagon, panting, covered in gore. Mogduff limped nearby, dragging a horse carcass. Their eyes met for a moment. Then they looked away. No words. No nods. But something shifted. Behind a smoking rock, Sniknibble rubbed his hands together, grinning so wide his jaw cracked. "WAAAGH is comin'," he whispered. "And it's gonna be beautiful." Chapter 7. The Feast of Victory. The battlefield had barely cooled before the feasting began. Crows still picked at the twitching piles of human corpses. The stink of burnt horseflesh mingled with iron blood and squig droppings. Smoke curled from shattered wagons and flame-scorched tents. The shattered ridge of Kraggfang Hold loomed above it all, black against the bloody twilight. And beneath it, in the cratered remains of the Gobbo camp, the feast was underway. A green-skinned bacchanalia of bellowing, belching, and bone-crunching madness. Because orcs don't celebrate like men. They consume. More guts, less guff. The campfire pits were dug into the mud, each one fed with firewood and screaming mushrooms, sending up clouds of green smoke that made the air sting and the hallucinations interesting. Spits turned over the flames, heavy with horse meat, charred squig, and hunks of still-armored humans. One knight's face bubbled slowly in a pot of fungus brew, and nearby a red-toothed knob used a dwarven femur to stir a soup thick with eyeballs and rot. Ironfangs and Redtooth boys mingled, not as allies, not yet, but in the wary, lurching way of predators sizing each other up between bites. They didn't stop fighting, of course. That would be unnatural. But now it was all in good fun. A jaw was broken here. A groin crushed there. 2 orcs bit each other's ears off and laughed about it later. Squig-eating contests were in full swing. One orc, eyes bloodshot, gut distended, tried to force a still-kicking blue squig down his gullet and promptly exploded. Cheers erupted. His mates roasted the bits and passed them around. Elsewhere, headbutting duels clanged and splattered through the night. A circle formed around a contest between a red tooth and an iron fang, who kept slamming their foreheads together until one of them collapsed with his nose driven into his brain. Victory was declared with an ear-splitting "Ay! The tail spinnin' begins. At the feast's heart, under a sagging tent of stolen banners and stitched hides, Ghazruk the Skullkrakka and Mogduff One-Tusk sat on thrones made from war debris and stacked skulls. A massive pit of roasting meat steamed between them, and each had a barrel of mushroom brew large enough to drown a troll. They were surrounded by their lieutenants, squigs, and minor nobs, all grinning, bleeding, or both. Ha! And like all orcs after a good bloodletting, they were bragging. "That who me captain I boshed," Ghazruk growled, slamming a haunch of meat on the table. "He screamed like a squig what sat on a cactus. I ripped his arms off and beat him with him. Twice." Laughter. Cheers. One gobbo fainted. Mogduff wasn't to be outdone. He took a deep swig of fungus wine, spat out a finger, and smirked. "Beer." I cut a Hume knight in half, lengthwise, wive one swing. Watched his face slide off like warm cheese. Then I made his horse wear the rest o' him like a cloak. Raucous, cackling. A nearby orc choked on his beer and died. No one noticed. The stories grew wilder, louder, bloodier. Skull crumpin', spine removals, squig accidents. It all became a contest of savagery and volume. But in the shadows beyond the firelight, something else stirred. Entered the prophet. Sniknibble, robed in greasy bones, glowing shrimp paint and wild-eyed glee, emerged from the blackness like a disease. His staff clicked with dangling teeth. His tongue flicked like a lizard's. The smoke curled around him like a living thing. A few grots gasped. A few bigger orcs threw bones at him. Physiological effect. He didn't flinch. He howled. "Heed me, O greenskins!" he shrieked. His voice cracked like lightning, magically amplified to echo over the pit of feasting murderers. "The green moon speaks to me. It glowed tonight with the blood of humies and the spirit of WAAAGH." The orcs paused. Just a little. Because when a shaman foamed at the mouth and screamed about the moon, you listened. It showed me a vision, a prophecy of two boys, two choppers of destiny. He spun in place, firelight gleaming off his greasy skin. One is da Skullkrakka, who kills with roaring hate. Da other is One-Tusk, who stops with cunning and wrath. Ghazruk frowned. Mogduff raised an eyebrow. Sniknibble pointed his staff skyward, where the clouds briefly parted. The moon, green-tinged from rising warp vapors, shone down like a pus-filled eye. "Together," Sniknibble screeched, "de will lead the greatest WAAAGH in all the Badlands. The stunties will weep blood. The humans will run. Even the big nasty things in the north will tremble." Silence. And then a single voice, probably drunk, bellowed, "WAAAGH." Another joined in. "With WAAAGH." Then dozens. "WAAAGH, WAAAGH, 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 WAAAGH." They chanted. They howled. They roared both bosses' names. Over and over, the blood-soaked crowd whipped into a frenzy by a mad goblin and a blood-soaked moon. Ghazruk glanced at Mogduff. Mogduff glanced back. Neither said a word, but neither stopped the chanting either. And as the drums pounded and the bonfires roared and squigs devoured unfortunate goblins who tripped into the pit, Sniknibble backed into the shadows once more, grinning like a loon, twitching with power. "Dat," he whispered to himself, Went better'n I thinked. Chapter 8. De betrayal, what wasn't. The moon hung low and too green in the sky, sickly and swollen, like a festering boil ready to burst. The fires from the feast still smoldered across the battlefield, casting flickering shadows over piles of bones, splattered armor, and the shredded remains of what might have once been a barded warhorse. But the celebration was over. Now came the fallout, killin' quiet-like. The wind whispered through the shattered outer walls of Kraggfang Hold, where Ghazruk de Skullkrakka paced like a caged wyvern. His massive form cast a jagged silhouette in the moonlight, steam rising from his shoulders where sweat mingled with crusted blood and dried squig grease. He didn't trust the silence. He didn't trust the way the Red-Tusk boys had stopped sneering. And most of all, he didn't trust the way Mogduff One-Tusk had kept staring at him during the feast, not with hate, but with something worse. Consideration. "Does ain't right," Ghazruk muttered. "Ain't natural." That's when the assassins struck. The backstabbing begins. They came out of the dark like knives from a shadow, 3 red-tooth fanatics, lean and fast, their green skin stained with war paint and hate. One wore a belt made of orc ears, another had iron claws welded to his fingers, the third moved like a spider and carried a vial of squig venom clutched in his teeth. They didn't scream. They just attacked. The first drove a serrated blade into Ghazruk's back, aiming for the spine. The armor held, barely, but the pain staggered him. The second leapt, clamping onto Ghazruk's shoulder like a tick, stabbing with bone shivs and snarling filth about pure WAAAGH, our power, and no need for ally. The third, the spider-limbed freak, tried to jam the squig venom into Ghazruk's throat. He got his jaw broken for the effort. Ghazruk roared and exploded into violence. His back bleeding, vision red with fury, he grabbed the second assassin mid-stab and crushed his head like a fruit, brain pulp slapping across the stone like wet meat. The first tried to flee. Ghazruk hurled the body of his dead mate at him, snapping the coward's spine as they collided. The third, Poison Gob, tried to crawl away, wheezing and whimpering. Ghazruk grabbed him by the legs. "You think I's soft now, do ya?" he growled. "You think Ghazruk's making friends?" He lifted the squirming Gob like a club and beat him to death against the wall, over and over and over, until there was nothing left but green pulp and shattered iron teeth. When it was done, Ghazruk staggered to his knees, bleeding heavily. His hand shook. The anger came, as expected. But behind it was a flicker of something more dangerous. Doubt. This truce is done. The next morning, Kraggfang Hold rang with Ghazruk's voice. "Dietrich, tie, kill me," he roared, standing atop the fortress's gatehouse, body wrapped in fresh chains like war medals. Blood leaked from his wounds, his face twisted in murderous fury. Iron Fang's boys banged weapons against shields, their war drums rising in tempo. Red-Tusk nobs looked tense, hands on hilts, shifting in the mud. "Dest what a dub was a lie, de Red-Tufts want me dead?" Below, Mogduff One-Tusk pushed his way through his boys, face unreadable, his golden tusk dull in the morning haze. Sniknibble, lurking nearby, went cold. It was falling apart. He'd seen the prophecy work, seen the 2 warbosses nearly walking lockstep. And now, a single knife in the dark threatened to undo everything. Sniknibble's fingers twitched toward his staff, half ready to summon a storm of green fire or fake another vision, when Mogduff did something no one expected. He walked through his own ranks. Then he pointed to his lieutenants. You, and you, bring me the names." Red-Tusk Justice. Within the hour, 3 Red-Tusk nobs were dragged into the central square, screaming, spitting, biting. Mogduff watched with narrowed eyes. "These gits acted without me say so," he snarled. "They betrayed our truce. They ain't red tooths no more." He drew his kleva, stepped forward, and in 3 swift, brutal strokes, he made good on his words. The first was decapitated mid-sentence. The second tried to flee. Mogduff's squig handler shot a bolt through both knees, and the kleva finished the job. The third, the ringleader, the spider-limbed one, still half alive and bound in rusty chains, Mogduff took his time with. He started at the ankles. Sniknibble turned away, not from horror, but awe. Even Ghazruk was silent as Mogduff wiped the blood from his blade on the twitching corpse and turned to face him. "We might hate each other," Mogduff said flatly, "but I ain't letting my lads act like snivelling stunties." Ghazruk didn't answer immediately. His eye twitched. His fists flexed. Then a grunt. A moment between monsters. Later, away from the eyes of the boys, the 2 warbosses sat in the ruined war room of Kraggfang Hold, sharing a single barrel of fungus rum. Not out of friendship, just necessity. "We nearly lost it all," Ghazruk muttered, voice gravel in his throat. Mogduff nodded once. "Won't be the last time." They drank in silence. After a long while, Ghazruk said, "Yeah, still a bastard." Mogduff smirked. "Takes one to know one." Another pause. "But you're right," Ghazruk admitted, slowly, painfully. "We fight better, together." They didn't shake hands. They didn't toast. They didn't even look at each other. But something changed. There, in the crumbling ruin, under the shadow of war, the foundations of something monstrous began to solidify. The real WAAAGH. In the dark Dagabo grins. Back in his grotto, Sniknibble giggled as he stirred a pot of tar-tick soup with a bone stirrer still clutching a ring. "I thought I lost it," he muttered. "I really thought it was over." He tossed in a squig eyeball and slurped noisily. "But now, oh now, dey's really in it." It scratched a crude mural on the wall, 2 giant orc bosses standing above a burning city, weapons raised, moons shining down in twisted glory. Then he carved 3 words beneath it. Da Rayol, W-A. Chapter 9. Da Big WAAAGH Begin. Kraggfang Hold no longer echoed with petty squabbles and tribal insults. It thundered with war drums. From its shattered towers to its cracked, gore-slick courtyards, the fortress had become a furnace of iron and bone, spewing forth the smoke of industry and the stench of purpose. The constant din of hammer-on-steel squig howls and bellowed orders roared through the Badlands like a storm with tusks. Because something had shifted. 2 warbosses, once too proud to spit on the same corpse, now stood shoulder to shoulder, reluctantly, violently, and with no shortage of snarling. Ghazruk the Skullkrakka and Mogduff One-Tusk were co-ruling, and the world should have trembled, banners into wind. On the highest battlement of Kraggfang, twin banners snapped in the war-born breeze. Ghazruk's, a blackened orc skull split by a jagged iron axe, nailed to a tanned ogre hide and surrounded by the teeth of his former challengers. Mogduff's, a blood-slicked red glyph of Mork, grinning from a flayed troll's skin, sharpened bone tusks stitched to the bottom like trophies. They flew together, uneasy, chaotic, glorious. Below them, the horde assembled. Roll call, you gets. It wasn't just a warband anymore. It was a WAAGH. Tens of thousands of green bodies snarled and shoved their way into rough, shifting formations. Goblins, orcs, and monsters of every ugly breed milled like meat in a grinder. Boar boys, their mounts frothing and armored in rusted scrap, head-butted each other for position. Some rode double, some triple, hanging on by ropes and teeth. The boars trampled anything too slow to move. Stone trolls and river trolls, drooling and swatting flies the size of cats, lumbered between units, barely understanding why they were here, but thrilled to be smashing things soon. Goblin fanatics danced in circles, already huffing weird spores, chains wound tight around iron balls bigger than their heads. One accidentally launched himself through a squig pen and was never seen again. Doom divers, mounted on flimsy, grease-slicked catapults, strapped themselves into crude gliders made from bat wings and stolen tent canvas, screaming war songs about gettin' proper launched. Snotlings swarmed through the muck, looting unguarded bags, biting each other, and being stepped on by accident, and sometimes on purpose. Squigs of every breed bounded, bit, and belched their way across the camp, some herded, most not. Above it all, the sound of drums. War drums. Orc drums. Massive things made from giant bones and stretched wyvern hide, pounded by goblins too deaf to care when they got it wrong. The Badlands shook. Do bosses speak? Sort of. In the central plaza of Kraggfang, on a towering pile of corpses, squig meat, and crushed beer barrels, Ghazruk and Mogduff stood before the horde. Neither liked speeches, so they made it short. Ghazruk roared, "We's goin' north!" Mogduff snarled, "And any git who don't like it dies first." The horde answered in one voice. Well, accurate. Even the rocks trembled. Da prophet of da bashin. At their side stood Sniknibble, once a scheming runt in the shadows, now clad in robes made from stitched-together squig hides and dwarf scalps, a staff crowned with a triple skull totem and green warps. He was now high prophet of da bashin, a goblin messiah. "The moon speaks," he shrieked to the howling masses. "It says, stomp hard, stomp long, stomp everything." Orcs bellowed. Goblins gibbered. Even trolls fluttered in approval. The prophet threw handfuls of squirming beetles into the air, each one glowing with warp fire. "The green moon rides with us!" The crowd roared so loud that several squigs detonated from sheer overstimulation. March in order, or what passes for it. They left Kraggfang Hold in a tide of green violence, a moving wall of rust and rage. The army moved like an avalanche of snarling meat and sharpened metal, swallowing valleys and flattening hills in their wake. Squads of squig hoppers bounced ahead to scout. Goblin wolf riders flanked the columns, howling and stabbing anything that moved, including each other. At the head, Ghazruk and Mogduff rode side by side, each astride massive armored warboars, tusked and steaming, snorting like kettles filled with hatred. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. Every now and then they'd glare at each other, then smile, then punch the nearest grot just to prove they weren't soft. Other tribes take notice, and as they marched, the Badlands noticed. From the craggy peaks of the World's Edge Mountains to the broken lands near the Black Gulf, the word spread like a bloody echo. Two bosses, one WAAGH, banners together, stomp on everyone. Tribes that had never followed orders began to stir. Grot cults in the marshes of madness daubed their faces in mud and followed the call. Night goblins in the depths of Karak 8 Peaks whispered of the twin bashes who would break the stunty chains. Black orc mercenaries along the Blackfire Pass abandoned their contracts and headed south, hungry for real war. Like a festering tide they came, more orcs, more goblins, more everything. Sniknibble watched it all, eyes wide, mouth dry, and one thought hammering in his brain. I did this. I actually did this. Then he laughed. Then he screamed at a mushroom that looked at him funny. And the WW marched on. Chapter 10. Much Ado About WAAAGH. The World's Edge Mountains loomed like jagged fangs in the morning mist, teeth of stone rising from a gullet of broken rocks and ice-cracked passes. Cold winds howled through their chasms, and the air was thick with the scent of steel, fungus oil, and blood not yet spilled. Perched on a rocky promontory stood a dwarf outpost, squat and stubborn, built into the cliffside like a tumor of stone and pride. Kazad Dreg, they called it. An old supply station, a minor stronghold. An afterthought. But it had gold. And it had insulted the WAAGH, which meant it had to die. Da, calm before da bashin. The horde lay sprawled across the mountain path below, stretching for miles. From a distance, it looked like a plague rolling uphill, swarming, irregular and alive with noise. Squigs bounced, boars snorted, trolls farted. And above it all, drums. Dozens of war drums, pounding like giant hearts pumped with hatred. Each beat echoed off the stone cliffs, growing louder, closer, more inevitable. On a jagged cliff overlooking the warpath, Sniknibble stood still. For once, he wasn't shrieking, cackling, or throwing mushrooms at a grot. He was just watching. His eyes, red-rimmed from sleep deprivation and warp spore fumes, blinked against the dawn light. Beneath him, tens of thousands of greenskins itched for slaughter. And he knew. He had done this. Not Gork. Not Mort. Not fate. Him. One scheming little gobbo with a twitch and a talent for lying. His staff twitched in his hands as he whispered to himself, "What a beautiful mess." Then he turned and walked toward the front lines. "Oi, we go left. No, we go right." At the head of the vanguard stood the twin bosses. Ghazruk the Skullkrakka, broad as a squig cart, armor caked in blood and squig grease, his rusted chain axe Mork's grin revving like a caged daemon. Mogduff One-Tusk, leaner, meaner, eyes narrowed behind a blackened helm, his cleva dripping from a morning execution and still humming from the warp etchings carved into the blade. They stood shoulder to shoulder atop a massive iron chariot pulled by two blind, mutated cave squigs the size of trolls. Around them, their boys snarled and spat, punching each other just to pass the time. And of course, they were arguing. "Oi, I'm leading the charge," Ghazruk barked, cracking his knuckles. "Yous can flank the short-beard gits when I'm done with 'em." Mogduff growled. "No chance, you greasy meatball. I got da left flank last time. It's your turn. Wait." "I ain't waiting." "You ain't charging first." They shoved. The chariot shook. A nearby goblin burst like a grape under a stray boot as both bosses roared, teeth gnashing, fists swinging. Then came the horn. A single monstrous war horn, carved from a giant's thigh bone, and enchanted to echo like the voice of Mork himself. Both bosses froze. Their eyes locked. They didn't smile. They didn't nod. But they charged together. De bashin proper. Kazad Dreg's walls bristled with iron and fury, crossbows and grudges. Dwarfs manned the parapets, grim-faced and furious, their armor gleaming, their beards braided for war. Then they heard it. The W-A. It wasn't just a sound. It was a force. A roaring, rolling avalanche of green bodies and jagged steel. It hit the outer defenses like a wave of angry iron. The first to reach the wall were the squig riders, bouncing and howling, their beasts frothing and shrieking. They smashed into the gates with wild abandon, flattening barricades and biting through armor. Next came the boar boys, shoulder to shoulder, tusks lowered, trampling anything that stood. The clang of dwarf steel couldn't match the weight of madness behind them. Fanatics tore through ranks, spinning their chain balls with manic glee, pulverizing warriors into wet heaps. Trolls hurled boulders and goblins alike, vomiting acidic bile over gunpowder barrels. The resulting boom cracked the gate. And then, through the smoke and shrapnel, The twin bosses charged in. Ghazruk cleaved through a shield wall, chain axe screaming and blood spraying in rhythmic arcs. Mogduff danced around him, blade flashing, carving through mail and beard, stabbing dwarfs in places even they didn't know they had arteries. And for a heartbeat they stood back to back. An iron-clad dwarf champion charged them with a flaming hammer and a shield etched in runes. They didn't speak. Ghazruk punched the dwarf's shield. Mogduff stabbed him through the visor. Together they tore him in half. Then they went back to shouting at each other. "8-1 was mine. Shoulda hit him faster, you meat-headed oaf." A prophecy fulfilled. From the cliffs above, Sniknibble watched the walls crumble. His eyes gleamed green in the smoke light. Flames danced in the distance. The air was thick with metal, blood, and burnt beard. He saw Ghazruk laugh as he head-butted a cannon crew to death. He saw Mogduff bite off a dwarf's nose and spit it into another's eye. And he saw the orcs fighting together, still arguing, still threatening to kill each other, still trying to one-up every swing. But not apart, never again. A wide, toothy grin stretched across Sniknibble's scarred little face. He licked a bit of soot off his staff and whispered the final word of his plan. Worth it. Finale. And through the broken gates of Kazad Dreg, with fire rising and drums beating and the sky boiling green, the cry of the WAAAGH shook the very mountains. It came from thousands of throats. It came from drums, from war horns, from the mouths of squigs and trolls and fanatics and goblins and monsters. It came from 2 warbosses roaring louder than thunder. WAAAGH. And somewhere, deep in the bones of the earth, even the ancestors of the dwarfs shuddered.